Engineering the impossible claw, Clementine. Here's where the math stops being abstract. 16,500 feet isn't a depth, it's a regime. Pressure near 7,300 psi wants to crush voids, thicken oils, and slow valves. Light is useless. Cameras turn to snow. Most people think you send a sub with big lamps. You don't. At that depth, vision lies. Touch tells the truth. So the brief sounds simple and reads insane. Build a capture vehicle that can find, grip, and lift a shattered submarine section, blind while looking like mining. They give it a soft name, Clementine. On drawings, it's a frame with 6 articulated fingers. In steel, it's a cathedral of trusses, hinge knuckles, and hydraulic muscle, scaled to straddle a broken cylinder and hug internal frames, not fragile plating. Each finger needs 2 virtues that rarely coexist: strength to hold and compliance to not shred embrittled steel. Now, this is important because the wreck isn't uniform anymore. Years at depth, cold-soaked welds and seeded microcracks. The implosion in 1968 and the seabed impact pre-stressed everything. Grip the wrong rib and you rip history. That's why the shoes are wide, slightly soft with elastomer layers, and shaped to search for bone, frame edges and ring stiffeners, by load signature, not by sight. Load cells and contact switches along each finger tell operators when they've found structure. If the graph holds during a microlift, you're on bone. If it slides, you're on paint. You don't hang Clementine on a single cable. You build a riser string, all-field style, miles long, 60-foot pipe joints stacked into a steel spine. Every thread is a potential future headline. The ocean treats that spine like a tuning fork. Engineers model resonance, then detune it with mass collars, fairings, and diameter steps so vortex shedding never locks onto a clean note. If the sea finds rhythm, it will sing your lift apart. Everything changes when you add the ship's motion. The surface rides a swell, the bottom doesn't. If the deck moves feet and the frame moves inches, brittle metal pays for your slop. Enter heave compensation, accumulators the size of rooms, cylinders, servo valves, and control logic senses deck heave and pushes equal and opposite in real time. It's not magic, it's a governor on violence. It holds vertical load inside a band tight enough that the wreck feels a steady hand instead of a yank. Positioning is geometry under pressure. They lay a long baseline array of acoustic beacons around the site. Clementine carries transponders. The ship solves ranges into position and holds station with thrusters while the derrick meters feed. A quarter-degree error up top becomes feet down there. Feet break things, inches buy time. So the control room lives by numbers, lateral offsets, your drift, vertical rate, rendered big and simple. Let me show you the first contact. There's no window, there's a hum. The riser's strain climbs a hair and doesn't drain like mud. The operator eases right, lifts a whisper, watches the plateau. That feels like steel. Outer fingers close first, wide and patient to spread load. Pause, let the hull settle into clamp. Trim millimeters. Inner fingers hunt for internal frames until each finger's load cell sings the same song. Then a tiny test lift, mere inches. If the load holds shape, you've got structure. If it slips, you breathe, back off, reposition, and try again. Micro story from shore trials. They built a mock cylinder, clamped wrong on purpose, and listened to failure. The sound was a dull pop, not a scream. The needles told the story first. That ritual, trust the gauges, not your gut, became religion. Now you might be thinking, why not just overbuild and crush certainty into place? Because the wreck will fail before your frame does. Cold embrittlement lives at weld toes and bolt holes. A brute clamp writes a headline you can't retract. So they design sacrificial links, cheap metal that fails loud and early before the main frame does. They put hinge pins in all filled pockets so friction stays predictable in the cold. They tune elastomer hardness so it spreads pressure without creeping under load. They build compliance into strength. Control is where good intentions die. Miles of pipe add delay. The heave comp can lead the vertical wave, but a perfect vertical correction can feed lateral and torsional energy if phase drifts. So the frame carries torsion sensors and lateral accelerometers. If a slow twist wakes up, operators change thruster posture to tilt the string a degree, run a microlower to bleed stored energy, or shift control phase to shove the system out of the bad band. Modal monitoring isn't a sidebar, it's the main plot. Here's the part most people miss. The machine has to act like a miner to keep the lie alive. Cable trays wear survey labels. Winches are riser support. The moon pool doors are weather shields. Deck choreography looks like pipe handling. Noise sounds like drilling. If a Soviet trawler points a long lens, they see industry, not a theft. Risk never leaves. A misstalked joint 10,000 feet down is a patient saboteur. A forgotten damper lets a whisper of oscillation fatten into a sawtooth hours later. A thermocline thickens drag and nudges phase off by degrees that matter. So they write rituals, torque logs at every joint, ultrasonic checks on suspect threads, acoustic health monitoring listening for the ping of a crack starting. Hear a ping, pause, bleed, reset. Rehearsal turns courage into calm. In a quiet patch, they lower onto planted targets, relearn how hydraulics that behave on deck turn molasses in cold, and recalibrate sensors that drift. The lesson is humbling and constant. Perfect doesn't exist. Good enough to climb is the only green light you'll ever get. Clementine leaves the yard elegant and temperamental, a machine built to do what physics barely allows. Once. Everyone on board knows the ocean will try to teach it a new note. The job is simple and brutal. Make sure that note doesn't become the one you hear when metal lets go. The Glomar Explorer sets the stage. Everything we've built so far, the lie and the machine, needs a stage that looks boring from a mile away and impossible from 5 feet. The Hughes Glomar Explorer is that paradox. From the dock, it reads like a supersized drill ship, towering derrick, cranes, helideck, and a boxy superstructure stretched across a football field of steel. But the magic sits in the middle, a moon pool the size of a basketball court, sealed by segmented, weather doors that can swallow a secret hole. You don't lift a submarine onto an open deck. You bring the ocean inside and close the roof. Now, this is important because the center well changes exposure. Satellites can't see into a box. Soviet trawlers can't film through steel. Deck choreography looks like routine riser handling, pipe sections moving from racks to the derrick, then disappearing into the ship's throat. Inside that throat is the garage, a hidden bay where Clementine can mate, where recovered structure can rise into dry air without a single watcher getting a line of sight. Outside, it's a mining show. Inside, it's a black-budget theater. Crew dynamics make the illusion work. Two realities share one hull. The cover team wears logos, fills out all productivity logs, and talks in the grammar of exploration. The cleared team speaks numbers that matter: load, torque, drift. Walk past a bulkhead, and the conversation flips from investors to impact coefficients. A quiet rule governs everything. If you're on the wrong side of the door, you don't ask. That's not just security, it's cognitive insulation. People perform better when their story is consistent. But here's where it gets interesting. The ship doesn't sail into empty ocean. It's shadowed. Soviet auxiliaries, fishing trawlers with too many antennas, linger at visual range. They count patterns, pipe trips, station-keeping cycles, helicopter runs. If the profile matches drilling, suspicion stays manageable. If anything looks off, questions get louder. So Glomar runs a script: regular pipe trips, periodic maintenance, holds, and noisy but explainable clanks from the derrick. Maritime boredom as armor. Operational camouflage isn't just behavior, it's media noise. Trade journals gush about nodules. Lobbyists brief staffers on industrial frontiers. The goal isn't headlines, it's plausibility. When a trawler radios American mining ship stationery in sector, a desk officer can pull a clipping that says, "Yes, Hughes is mining nodules." The cover breathes because paper exists to back it. Inside the ship, you feel the duality. One deck over, a crewman inventories, or samples that don't exist. Down in the moon pool control room, operators babysit heave compensation and stare at displays that turn ocean motion into math. The well goes cathedral quiet when it has to. Once the doors slide shut, the ship becomes a private planet. In that sealed volume, lasers can measure, cutters can spark, and cameras can record without a photon leaking outside. Security wraps around the hull in subtle ways. Tugs keep distance. A supply barge sits athwart, blocking long lens angles. Radar paints nearby vessels early. Radio protocols use euphemisms, pumps down, string stable, phrases that mean everything to the cleared ear and nothing to anyone else. A contingency plan lives where no one wants to look. If boarding is attempted, initiate emergency destruction and flood the well. You don't pray that page stays shut. You train so it never gets pulled. Now you might be thinking, what if the Soviets probe? They don't need to fire. They can drift close, call on a loud hailer, and ask to inspect for safety. That's where the cover earns its keep. A commercial ship can claim proprietary tech, hazardous operations, and procedures that can't pause. The captain can offer a tour of the wrong deck, show a lab with bins and charts, and never open the doors that matter. A warship argues. A miner deflects. There's a micro-story that nails the edge. A trawler lingers close. On deck, the cover team accidentally spills dummy processing crates. Forklifts scramble. Radios chirp. It looks like industrial clumsiness. The trawler logs a minor deck incident. Below, the cleared team barely glances up from a load plot. Everything changes when the descent begins. Pipe goes over the rotary, joint by joint, threaded and taut to ritual. Each 60-foot segment drops into the moon pool, vanishes into dark, and adds weight, risk, and commitment towards 16,500 feet. The positioning array wakes up. Thrusters tighten stance. If the sensors misread, Clementine will close on silt. If the readings hold, a vibration up the pipe soon says steel. On every deck, two sentences collide. Act like miners, think like thieves. One last detail anchors the fiction in steel. The derrick rides a 600-ton gimbal that keeps the rotary level as the ship moves, a true drilling necessity that also makes the silhouette convincing. Real engineering doing double duty as camouflage. That's the theme. Every visible choice serves a hidden purpose. When you get that right, you don't need a better lie. You need steadier hands. And here's the open loop you can't shake. Once the doors shut and the ocean disappears, the ship holds a secret no camera can catch. If anything goes wrong down there, the only witnesses are needles, numbers, and the people who have to live with them. Descent into black water. Lowering the pipe is a ritual. A 60-foot joint swings in, threads bite, torque hits spec, and the joint slides into the moon pool. Then another, then another. Hours stack into a steel spine aimed at a point 16,500 feet down. Fatigue discipline becomes law. Rotate crews before judgment fogs, verify every coupling, retorque after thermal soak, and keep the heave comp inside its band, so the top never whips what the bottom can't forgive. Now this is important because time multiplies risk. Each joint adds weight, friction, and one more place where a tiny nick can grow teeth. So the cadence feels slow and isn't. Verify, lift, thread, pressure test hydraulics, confirm Clementine's transponder, and track the load curve like it's a pulse. If the line drifts off the model, you stop. If it starts to sing, you detune it with dampers before it walks the string. Navigation is geometry in a living medium. You don't point and drop. You solve drift in 3 axes while the sea lies. Long baseline beacons ping from the bottom, Clementine answers, and computers chew ranges into position. Thrusters push against stubborn current. The derrick meters feed to match compensation. The acoustic team whispers corrections. Lateral 0.6 left, your 0.2 right. A quarter degree up here is feet down there. Feet break things. Inches buy time. Everything changes near bottom. Flow calms, risk sharpens. Sonar returns smear in backscatter. Visuals are snow. The team flies instruments, not eyes. Velocity bleeds into a hover. Offsets tick down. The ship locks its stance and trades speed for certainty. In the control room, the noise floor drops. You can hear numbers move. Contact isn't a thud, it's a stiffness in the riser's song. Strain climbs a hair and doesn't drain like mud. They test it. Nudge right, lift a whisper, watch the plateau. That feels like steel. A silence settles that isn't fear, it's attention. Now the choreography. Outer fingers first, wide and patient. Close until load cells register resistance. Pause. Let the hull exhale into clamp. Trim millimeters to equalize. Inner fingers next, hunting for frames through feel, not light. Each closure is followed by a tiny test lift, just inches to see if the curve holds shape. If it does, you're on bone. If it slips, you're on paint. The first lift sticks. A pencil mark goes on a pad. Bone. Micro story from shore drills. They ripped a mock shell on purpose. The sound was a dull pop. The needles moved first. That's the lesson that runs the room. Trust the gauges, not your gut. Gut is late at 16,500 feet. Now you might be thinking, lock it and go. Not yet. Currents try to torque the frame. The pipe stores energy waiting for a note. They run a damped oscillation test, small commanded lifts and settles, to see if a mode is lurking. A faint loop in the load trace hints at trouble. They add mass in the compensator, shift phase on the valves, and tweak thrusters to change string angle. The loop flattens, not perfect, good enough to climb. They commit. Orders are simple and terrifying. Lift at planned rate, hold alignment, keep compensation inside limits, call anything outside thresholds. The derrick finds rhythm. Each joint rises, pauses for weight transfer, then disappears into racks. The compensator breathes, dump, take, equalize, so the bottom never feels the top's worst moods. On deck, the cover routine plays. Forklifts, clipped radio calls, the theater of mining. Below, language narrows to numbers. Minutes turn to hours. The operator rides phase like a surfer rides sets. Anticipate, don't chase. A thermocline brushes the string. Drag thickens. Vertical load ticks up, then settles as the envelope swallows the step. Thrusters nudge to kill a slow yaw the current wants to feed. Beacons keep talking. The model and the ocean negotiate. Now, this is important because the system remembers. Miles of steel delay reality. The compensator's perfect vertical correction can feed lateral and torsional energy if phase drifts. They watch torsion sensors near the frame for a whisper of lateral mode. A hint appears, fades, then returns thinner. Someone writes, watch, next to a number and underlines it twice. A micropause to bleed energy becomes ritual. Up a hair, settle, wait for the loop to flatten, resume. The room relaxes in degrees that barely register. The ascent becomes thousands of small rescues. The goal isn't speed, it's coherence. If the graph stays fat and wobbling inside bands, you're winning. Everything changes at the first inspection hold. They lock position, check finger loads, scan for phase drift, and listen to the pipe. Nothing screams, everything whispers continue. The supervisor nods. The climb resumes, steady as a tide, stubborn as a promise. Before the first joint breaks air, someone murmurs what everyone knows. We're committed. Gravity runs both ways now. The ship hangs from the load as much as the load hangs from the ship. Above, the ocean is weather. Below, it's memory. The only way out is up, one joint at a time, while acting like miners and thinking like thieves. And somewhere in that column of steel, the sea is already hunting for a note you don't want to hear. The 12-hour ascent and the snap. The first hour wears a disguise called procedure. Checklists hum. The load trace wobbles inside the band they modeled on land. Heave compensation breathes, dump, take, equalize, keeping the wreck's bones from feeling the ship's worst moods. Calls stay clipped and bloodless, rate 0.15, lateral drift negligible, torsion quiet. Up top, the cover team keeps the theater loud. Forklifts clanking, hoses snapping, the clatter of pipe racks, so any binoculars translate precision into boredom. Below, needles, not nerves, decide. Now, this is important because the climb isn't one motion, it's 1,000 handoffs. Each joint rises, weight transfers, then clears the rotary while the compensator recenters the system. You don't feel a submarine. You feel attitude translated into needle twitches and a hum that grows familiar. The operator rides phase like a pilot in light chop. Anticipate, don't chase. Trim, don't tug. The goal is coherence, not speed. 2 hours. Numbers hold, but a faint tremor appears on a zoomed view. Micro-oscillations barely riding the main load. Someone circles the trace and writes, watch. Rate trims down a hair. Compensator phase shifts forward a beat. The wobble shrinks but refuses to vanish. That's not panic. That's respect for a miles-long spring that remembers everything you do to it and sings it back later if you're sloppy. 3 hours. A thermocline brushes the string. Drag thickens. Vertical load ticks up 1%. The envelope swallows the step. Thrusters nudge to kill a lazy yaw the current wants to feed. Acoustic beacons keep talking. The geometry tightens. Lateral 0.3 left, yaw 0.2 right. Feet down there become inches. The room breathes in sync with the graph. 4 hours. A veteran taps the glass over a torsion gauge and says, "If that drifts a hair more, we're chasing it." He's not dramatic. He's accurate. Procedure answers. Slower cadence, wider eyes on phase. Above, the cover team stages a maintenance pause that looks messy and reads normal. The trawler at the edge of sight logs it and slides along. 5 hours. The oscillations return, a shade larger and a touch slower. Accumulators swing deeper, the sawtooth you never want to see hints at a mode waking up. They run a planned micro-lower, mere inches to bleed energy. Hold, watch the loop flatten. Resume. It works mostly. Good enough to climb. Nothing at sea is perfect. The ocean punishes people who wait for perfect. 6 hours, halfway. The phrase no one says fits behind teeth. If it were going to tear, it might have torn by now. That's a lie professionals don't indulge. Oscillation energy doesn't care about clocks. It cares about phase. The operator trims rate again, shifts phase again, and the room returns to quiet math. The compensator keeps its promise, vertical load steady as a metronome. Lateral stays quiet enough to ignore, for now. 7 hours. A faint lateral whisper shows on a sensor near the frame. Wrong note, small amplitude. Thrusters change posture, tilting the string a degree to steal the ocean's rhythm. Whisper fades. A smile tries to show and gets flattened by habit. Numbers first, pride later. 8 hours. The system remembers a note you hoped it forgot. The wobble comes back with a longer period, like a loose hinge starting to talk. Finger loads remain even. Engagement still looks broad. The team runs another micro-lower, bleeds and reseats. The graph smooths. Everyone buys more minutes the old-fashioned way, by refusing drama and repeating discipline. 9 hours. The sawtooth deepens. The main load dips a fraction, spikes a hair, settles just under baseline. Mines do the same silent math, a redistribution down there. A finger lost a bite and a neighbor took it. No thresholds trip. No alarms scream. They slow the rate and tighten watch windows. The ascent becomes a negotiation with time, not height. Now, this is important because stillness isn't safety. Stopping can feed resonance as easily as moving, and dead time invites currents to shift, temperatures to creep, and fatigue to grow in silence. The safest speed is the one that keeps the system coherent without giving the ocean a clean note to sing. That's why the cadence stays, restrained, stubborn, alive. 10 hours. A groan threads through the derrick, more posture than sound. The main load drops 2% in a blink, spikes 3, then settles 1 below where it lived. Voices stay level, check finger loads, confirm geometry, verify phase. One finger gauge flutters, recovers, flutters again. Someone says, possible partial slippage. The supervisor answers, no shocks, prepare reseat. They nudge a tiny downward motion, measured inches to let shoes find bone again. The trace smooths. The room exhales through noses, not mouths. 11 hours, 20 minutes. The oscillation sneaks back stronger, as if the sea took offense. The compensator works near the edge of its band, but within it. A low vibration walks up handrails, telling veterans what the gauges will say next. And then failure arrives the way real failures do, without music. The main load goes light in a heartbeat. Needles swing. Pens race. The ship shudders, suddenly relieved of a fight it's been politely losing. A heartbeat later, the riser delivers a delayed thud, mass striking water far below. The new steady state settles lighter. Calls stay clinical, lock compensation, freeze rate, verify clamp status, confirm alignment. The operator says, remaining load stable. Everyone hears the unsaid words. A section fell. Aftermath is still mission. You lift what you still own. The cover team above keeps the boring show at full volume because the worst time to look interesting is now. Below, thresholds narrow. Every variance earns a pause. The ascent becomes a crawl where small rescues stitch into momentum. Patience is the only currency left. 11 hours, 50 minutes. The graph behaves like it learned a lesson instead of passing an exam. Finger loads stay even within tighter bands. Torsion hints but doesn't build. The system climbs because procedure is stubborn and the ocean hasn't found a new song it likes better. 12 hours. The first joints break air, spray hisses off steel. The moon pool doors wait like a throat ready to swallow truth. Numbers say enough survive to matter. Faces say they know what the deep kept. And the lesson rides up with the wreck. You don't beat the sea. You buy minutes, bleed energy, and refuse to lie to yourself about pride.